Welcome to Public Forum, a community outreach program produced by North Idaho College located on Lake Coeur d'Alene. Featuring guests from around the globe addressing a wide variety of subjects, Public Forum serves to educate and enlighten. Please join host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart, in welcoming today's guest.
It is our pleasure to welcome you to our program today, and it is a special program in the fact that it is our opportunity to introduce to our viewers a new congressman from the state of Idaho. In fact, our topic is a conversation with Idaho's first congressional district congressman, the Honorable Butch Otter. Our guest has served or was elected 4 times as lieutenant governor of the state of Idaho. In fact, it is a record. And in the year 2000 was elected from the first congressional district. Our guest serves on 3 standing committees in the United States House of Representatives: the Natural Resources, Transportation, and Government Reform. Congressman Butch Otter, congratulations and welcome back. We've had you on the program a number of times in other capacities, and it's a pleasure to have you here in this capacity.
Thank you, Tony. It's good to be here. I hope I was treated as well as you treated me in the past.
Well, it's always nice to see you, and always very easy to interview you.
Thank you.
I'm also pleased to welcome our regular panelist, Janelle Burke, who's an attorney in the state of Idaho, and next to her is Steve Schenck, the Vice President of College Relations and Development at North Idaho College, and Janelle will commence the questioning with Congressman Otter.
Well, welcome today to the program. We're very anxious to talk with you and find out, why was it that you wanted to run for office? What did you want to accomplish? And what are you setting out to accomplish? When we get a new job and we're really excited about things, what is it that you want to accomplish as the congressman from Idaho?
Well, Janelle, I wanted to win. No. But beyond that, as I was 30 years with the J.R. Simplot Company, the private sector in the state, which was natural resource based, agriculturally based, and also 14 years as Idaho's lieutenant governor. I've lived here all my life. I'm 58 years old. I was born and raised in the state. And I recognize, both as a businessman and as a political leader in the state, that it seemed like fewer and fewer of the decisions that were being made in the state were being made either by the political or the economic leadership or the political leadership of the state. And so my first and primary motivation for running was to, right or wrong, absent the right decision or not, Idahoans should be making more of those decisions than the federal government's making, about our natural resource base, about our economy, about our citizenry, about our education system, our transportation system, and all those things. So my primary reason for running was to return the authority to run the state to the state. We have the right, I was often quoted as saying, of being the architects of our own destiny.
And you're planning to spend quite a bit of time in our state, too. Can you kind of outline for our viewers what your plans are?
Yes, with the modern day travel and everything that we have, I remember when we used to, and this was a long time ago, of course, but when we elected representatives and senators, they went back to Washington, D.C., and you didn't see them probably until a few months before the next election. But now things are such, and Mike Crapo, Mike Simpson, Larry Craig, Helen Chenoweth before that, before me, have all set a pretty good standard of being able to get home to work the constituency, be in the district, walk the ground, find out what the problems are, and see if Washington, D.C. has an option for a solution to that, or if we should truly free up the resources that are needed and allow the folks right here in the state to do those things themselves. So with my district being huge, 582 miles long and 120 miles wide with 2 time zones in it, compared to a lot of other districts, not Montana and Wyoming, but compared to a lot of my colleagues, in fact, one of my colleagues from the state of Pennsylvania. And I asked him one day, I said, how big is your district? And he says, it's about 5-6 blocks wide and about 20 blocks long. And he's got like 5 zip codes in his district. And I said, I have 2 time zones in mine. So my intention is to go to the southern part of the district, my hometown, Star, Idaho, and be in that part of the district one weekend when I come home, and then the next weekend I come home, I'm coming home to Coeur d'Alene, to the northern part of the district, so that not only Coeur d'Alene, but of course on up the Panhandle to the border, and down to Lewiston and Moscow.
Steve Schenck.
Congressman Otter, I wonder if I could follow up a little bit on your response to Janelle's question regarding natural resources, which are very important to Idaho and to much of the West. I'll start with the forest products industry, if I may, and some of my friends in that business tell me this isn't just bad times, it may be the worst of times in their long experience. It seems odd in a way because until recently the economy in this country was very healthy, housing starts were up. What do you see as the reasons for the problems in that industry, and what do you see as the remedies?
Well, Steve, as you know, and as Tony alluded to, we're cutting this on the 16th day of February. This was not one of Idaho's best weeks, and it certainly wasn't one of the best weeks for the natural resource industry in the state, and especially the 1st Congressional District. But I want, with the closing of 2 Boise Cascade mills, the idling of 500 families have now got to make a major decision in their life. A lot of those families grew up in Emmett, Idaho, and Cascade, Idaho. And now they've got to uproot. They've got to go someplace else. They've got to find not only a new economic life, but a new direction in life for some of them. And it's tough. The reasons for that were stated that number one, the resource of logs off of the federal lands in the state just are not available. And those that are constantly under litigation. Boise Cascade's chief executive officer told me on Tuesday when we talked about this unfortunate circumstance was that they've had one sale of $19 million under litigation for 5 years. And what profit would have been made in that was pretty well eaten up with a lot of the legal costs of that. And I think that there's got to be some safeguards. We still need the judicial system to safeguard those areas where we fall down in the legislative or in the executive process. But there also needs to be some common sense brought back to this. And to be able to tie up a $19 million log sale, timber sale, that the experts said was ready to harvest, it was mature. The marketplace says it was needed because somebody bought it and somebody was ready to turn it into houses and into secondary uses of wood products. For that to be tied up for a $16 filing fee is beyond sense, beyond what is common sense. And we're finding the same thing in the minerals, in the area of minerals, constant litigation. So I think probably you're going to see some serious tort reform efforts made, especially in the area of natural resources. But what's the answer to it? It didn't just start, and it's not just happening here in Butch Otter's district. Since 1990, we've closed up 31 mills in the state of Idaho. Most of them are gone now. They're sawing up logs in Chile, in Brazil, in Argentina, in other places, in other locations around the world. We've gone in that time period, I was told yesterday, to 16 important ports. And the last time a major port of shipping of goods, and the last time one was created in the United States was in the late 70s. All the new ports of the world are opening up in Asia and in China, in South Americas, and even in some cases in Africa. And it's because they're using their natural resources, and they're using their natural resources to reaffirm their economic strength and their economic viability. So, yeah, we need to be careful with our environment, and we need to continue to have those safeguards, but we also need some reason brought back into this state.
Thank you very much.
As you've entered the Congress, you've had the pleasure, I'm sure, to have discussions with other members about our surplus, which has grown rather large, and we used not to have any surpluses.
See what happens when you elect me, Tony? Right off the bat.
So there's a very serious and important debate taking place of how much of that surplus should go to tax cuts, how much should go to prescription drugs for senior citizens, and how much should go to pay down the debt, which I know is one of the things that you've been concerned about for years is the debt, and other issues. So not only your position, but as you have the advantage we do not of talking with other members of the Congress on a daily basis, and again, I repeat, we're doing this on February 16th, and there might be some action before it airs. What do you see as the outcome? Will all of those share in that surplus? And the second part of my question is, going out 10 years, some of that's projection,
Sure.
It could be off, but I would love for you to have the opportunity to tell the constituency here what you think might happen.
Well, the estimates for what we're going to have in surplus over the next 10 years begin somewhere in the $2.5 trillion and goes up well over $6 trillion. And I think a modest and a very conservative projection by the President of the United States on giving a $1.6 trillion tax cut is falls short of even the most conservative estimate on what our surplus is going to be. We've already had some bad signs, turns in the economy since he became the President of the United States, and so who knows where that's going. But I will tell you this we do know. We have a need for some Medicare, especially on the pharmaceutical front. We have some obligations that we need to keep for the senior citizens. The $2.9 trillion lockbox that we passed at 400, I think the vote was like 402 to 3, no, pardon me, it was 407 to nothing. That we made, I think, we crossed a very important hurdle. We said that much money is not going to be subject to be spent anyplace else. Don't care what else we need. If we need money for anything else, we're going to raise taxes, we're going to go borrow it or something like that. But that money for Social Security and Medicare is locked up. You cannot spend that money on anything else from now for the next 10 years. So given that 2.9 and given the 1.6, somewhere in between is the rest of the money. What concerns those of us, and not only those of us that are back there and brand new, because we've witnessed from a distance the government's ability to spend money if it had it, and sometimes, in many cases in the past, when it didn't have it. And so what my concern is, and I think what the President's concern is, and many of my colleagues, is that any money you leave in Washington, D.C. that isn't committed someplace else and has a pre-commitment to it under the lockbox theory or under a tax cut theory is going to be spent on new programs, which then, once they gin up and start running, is going to put a demand on more cash flow, which then puts a demand on a tax increase. So I would say that who knows, looking at it from February 16th, where we're going to be in a week or 2 weeks or the next year, except that the process that we go through of locking up the money that we do know we're going to have means that we're not going to have room to create a whole bunch of new programs. I'm number one, if you owe money, you don't have a surplus. I believe that if you owe money, when my family, I've got 9 brothers and sisters, my dad was a journeyman electrician for the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. We never had a lot of money. But I'll tell you this, whenever he got a little bit of a bonus, it wasn't surplus because we probably owed it on the family car or on the mortgage on the place. So I don't believe you have surpluses when you owe money. So I've always been one who concentrated on paying your debts first before you go out and start any new programs or buy anything new. But that's not the sense of Congress. The sense of Congress is we'll pay it down on a reasonable basis. And as we pay that down, we are paying our debts. I'd just soon pay all the debt as quick as we can.
Yeah. I introduced that because I knew that was a position taken for years. One other quick question. There's a coalition developing between Republicans and Democrats in the House as we take this program about the tax issue and the tax cut, that one might be able to state it in such a way that, based on the projections, if they're wrong, the tax cut would be there, or less tax cut if there is a decline in the economy. Do you think that's a safe way to go about it, that rather than guessing what that might be and how much one would have for both that and the other programs that you talked about, like paying down the debt? Right,
Tony. Whether you call it the trigger,
right.
It's a trigger mechanism that's put in that you're on a sliding scale of tax cut. So much this year, so much next year, until you get down to ground zero where you intend to be. And in the President's offering of the tax cut, you get 6 million people that are going to move from being taxpayers into not being taxpayers. And that's all part of the scale. You've got the maximum tax level moving backwards about 12%, or 12 percentage points, I should say. So having said all that, if in the event that these projections do not materialize, then what that trigger mechanism would do is say, okay, these taxes aren't going to slide, these scales aren't going to slide down. So instead of 6 million people going out the bottom, no longer meeting the tax collector, maybe you stop at 2. And so you leave 4 million people in there. Instead of the scale dropping down 12, maybe it only 12 percentage points, maybe it only drops down 4 or 5. It's probably a smart thing to do because then you're managing your environment rather than letting your environment manage you, and put this thing hard. I quite frankly like locking that up as well. But I also recognize the dysfunction that can happen and the aggravation that it can create in an already very close and tenuous situation where the vote is so close in the House and in the Senate that it might not be something that you can reverse without that trigger mechanism. I quite frankly think that that most of those numbers are going to materialize. We do the same thing in the state of Idaho, in states, only we call it a rainy day fund. You know, we just put it over here and we say we're going to put this much money over here and we're not going to spend it. So whether you call it a trigger mechanism or a rainy day fund, about the same, Tony.
Thank you, Janelle Burke.
Idaho is a very large state, as you well know, and there's a lot of transportation in Idaho, and you're on the transportation department, or on the transportation committee in the Congress. What do you foresee as far as roads in Idaho? And I know during the campaign you had some ideas about what you would like to do to improve transportation in Idaho. Can you share that with our viewers?
Right. Well, you know, under the authorization of T21, which was the transportation budget for an ongoing period, we will reauthorize that next year. That'll come back for reauthorization. And basically what it does is it says that money goes into trust. When we collect 18 cents for a gallon of gas in the state of Idaho, that goes into a fund that can supposedly be spent on nothing but highways. So Washington, D.C. uses their authority to collect that money. They take it back there. Under T21, we said you will spend that money on highways. You won't spend it on anything else. We did the same thing, by the way, with airports, and we call it Air 21, or they called it Air 21. Both of those are up for reauthorization. Idaho is an import, what we call a donee state. Mm-hmm. We get back about $1.20 for every dollar that we actually send in. However, we give up a lot of other things for that as well, that some of my colleagues in other states that don't have as much federal land that enjoy much more in the way of airports. We don't get back all the airport money, for instance, that we might collect. So there's some other areas where we may not get back all the contribution that we make to the federal treasury, and we may get back a little bit more in the area of transportation. But bear in mind, now we also get back a lot more rules and regulations on how to spend that money that was collected, most of which was collected here. And I think that that's going to be one of my primary efforts on the Transportation Committee, not only to get back the continued flow of money for Highway 95 and it's the corrections that we need to make on and safeguards that we need to make on it, but also the opportunities that we may have on Highway 95 to make it a NAFTA highway, to open it up to a lot more Canadian goods flowing in to go out the Port of Lewiston, because we've got a trailhead for world trade in Idaho that this far inland that many other states don't enjoy, and that happens to be the Port of Lewiston. You know, the cheapest transportation known to man is to throw it, but you can't throw 268 million ton of soft white wheat to Taiwan. You got to ship it, and the next cheapest transportation known to man is the water, and we can ship 1 ton of wheat on an ocean-going barge for 1 gallon of diesel fuel from Lewiston, Idaho to Vancouver, Washington. Now, if you want to take it by rail, you're only going to get it 202 miles. If you're going to take it by truck, you get it 59 miles. So that water and those locks on that river are awful important to us. Part of that's going to come under the transportation system, too. But I think the surface transportation development and infrastructure is terribly important to affect a much greater advantage for us in the world marketplaces on our water transportation opportunities. But we've got some safety issues on 95, yes, which I've already brought up to the chairman and the subcommittee chairmans. We've got some areas up here where we've buried 30 plus Idahoans a year for far too long, and it's time for us to take a good hard look at that and make that a focus point for us, and that's what I'm going to do. And secondary to that is certainly going to be the opportunity that we might have for more transit of international goods.
Steve Sheik.
Congressman Otter, one of your committee assignments, government reform, also includes some oversight of national security matters.
Right.
Downsizing of the armed forces is a fact. I think many people agree that was probably a good idea, but I think there's a consensus growing that we may have cut too far, that salaries aren't high enough, that training dollars aren't there, that spare parts is not available, and the result is a preparedness level that's too low. I was personally a little surprised to see that President Bush's recommendation for an increase in the military budget was not that much greater than the budget proposed by former President Clinton. Do you think the increase is enough, just right, or how do you feel about that issue?
Well, Steve, that's a good question, but I will also tell you one, in asking me that question as a 6-week wonder in Washington, D.C. is probably a little premature. But let me just respond to that by what I do know now. I do know that since Ronald Reagan turned to Mr. Gorbachev, figuratively speaking, and said, if you're really serious, tear down that wall. I do know that we have engaged our forces 54 times around the world since then. I do know that we also have had a reduction in manpower of staggering proportions. I was surprised at how much we had reduced. I also know that there are other elements in the world who are seeking to become dominant in their ability to affect the world political scene from a potential military standpoint. And I'm not just talking about defensive weapons. So I think we have to look at each one of these threats separately. And the primary thing that the president has done thus far is he has said, I believe he said, we're adding $5.7 trillion billion dollars to the budget. With that, 3.9 of that's going to be in health care. Now, what that is really is we don't have that many. One would think, well, geez, we must have a lot of unhealthy people in the military if we're spending out of a $5.7 billion increase, that we're going to spend 3.9 billion of that in health care. But it's a retention and an attraction opportunity for us. By being able to compete with the private sector and other government sectors of saying, hey, our health care program is just as good as anybody else's, then we will get folks to not only come into the military, we recruit. The president is fond of saying we recruit individuals, we re-enlist families. And part of the health care dimension is a very important part of that. Another important part of that is $1 billion that's being $1 million. I'm new to this billion, trillion, zillion game. But $400 million is for housing. Once again, for the retention factor, because it costs $9,500 to recruit an individual. Now that's just to recruit them. And I was astonished when they told me that the Navy says that they talk to or potentially try to recruit out of every 80 people they talk to, they get one. And so they need these kinds of tools, and quite frankly, they're owed. If you're going to serve in the military service and provide the national defense for us, provide that element of national defense, I think they deserve to be treated fair. Another element of that, which I think is important, that the media pretty much is overlooked, is that part of that is also suggesting, the president is suggesting, we made some promises to the vets that we haven't been keeping. And so one thing we're going to do is we're going to keep those promises to those vets that did help us tear down that wall, number one. And number two, we want you folks that are in the military, active military service today, to know that when you get to that time, and you've helped us maintain a peaceful world as a result of tearing down that wall, we're going to keep our promises to you as well. So, is it enough now? No, but bear in mind, Steve, he also said this is phase one, and we're going to have, we want to take a look at what we're doing. What is our mission of military? What are we looking at in terms of what we're going to need to maintain the economic and peace in the world?
Thank you.
We're getting short on time, and I would love to
Are
pursue
my answers a little long?
No,
See,
that's
see
the
what
way.
happens to me when I go to Washington, D.C.
No, it's very important to get some detail in the answers. But you're going to be up here half your time, and so we'll have you back on the program and do other reports. We'd like to invite you to be on the program on a regular basis to report to your constituents. But in the short time we have left, since we are trying to introduce you to our audience and your staff, and share with us where your offices are in the 1st Congressional District. I know you have one here in Coeur d'Alene.
Yes, I have one here in Coeur d'Alene. I have one in Lewiston. I have one in Boise. And I'm adding an office. It hasn't been in Kenyon County before, but I'm adding an office in Kenyon County. And part of that is surely because of size, because of the amount of growth that we've had in that area. The 1st Congressional District has grown quite a little bit since the census was taken in 1990. In fact, I think you'll see a shift under the reapportionment of some 65,000 people. I've got 65,000 people that need to be shifted back in line to get the 1st and 2nd Congressional District in line. So I'm going to have 4 offices, and Mike Simpson has 4 offices in his district as well.
For those who are not in our state, we had just a little over a million people 10 years ago, and now it's about 1,250,000. So we've gained almost 250,000 people, and that's to be divided between our 2 congressional districts. So,
but more specifically, we've gained them in Kootenai County and West Ada and Kenyon County. So that's all the 1st Congressional District.
So it will require more services and all.
I don't think I'll ever get a district that's 5 blocks wide and 20 blocks long with 5 zip codes.
Not unless you move out of Idaho.
I wouldn't want it.
No, I know you.
District.
I know it is. I've traveled over it. It's a beautiful part of the world. On that note, Congressman Otter, I'd like to bring our program to conclusion. On behalf of our panel and our staff, we thank you for being here.
Thank you.
It's been informative, and many issues that we couldn't cover. And as I said a moment ago, we will have you back. We'll work with your staff to have you to report on other issues as it develops during the session of Congress. Again, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Tony and Steve and Janelle. I tell you, I'll be a lot smarter when I get back.
It was most informative, and we're very happy to see you. Ladies and gentlemen, our guest has been Congressman Butch Otter of the 1st Congressional District in the state of Idaho. He was elected in the year 2000 and is his first year in that position. As I indicated at the beginning of the program, he serves on natural resources, transportation, and government reform, although he certainly will deal with all other issues that's before the Congress, but that's some of his main responsibilities. I would like to invite you to be with us again next week at the same time when we shall move to yet another issue that we think is of interest to you. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
Recorded on the campus of North Idaho College, Public Forum is the longest-running entirely college-produced program on PBS. Each episode is pre-recorded live and is an educational outreach from North Idaho College. Please join us again at this same time next week for another edition of Public Forum on this public television station.